How's it going, Evo fam? I'm Cole. I'm going to lead this talk today. And today, our topic of discussion is a new episode from the Jochum Strength Podcast with Joel Smith, talking about kind of their beliefs on training and kind of mentioning, even though it's the name of the episode, mentioning Joel Smith's course of Elastic Essentials. We'll link the video and podcast in the description. But overall, my takes on the entire episode, we're kind of describing the different sides of training. They like to talk about it as the masculine and feminine side of things, but to me and to them, it's kind of describing the technical aspects and the more rhythm and artistic aspects of training. And going down that rabbit hole, most people see training as something in the weight room. You're just pushing weight. There, you've got your program, and there's very descriptive things that you're supposed to be doing that kind of have to do with pushing weight, getting faster, and are very direct. And that honestly misses out on a lot of things that like track people do and kind of other sports do that are more fluid, less instructions, and you're kind of just playing around and finding different movement options. And so that would be the feminine side of things, and that could be like hopping, games, or just kind of getting out of your head so your body can find these movement options that you didn't really know you had. What happens when you're in a game is you're not really thinking and you're kind of in this flow state. And so when we're thinking about things, we're being very analytical and our mind is just kind of whirling around and we don't really let our body move how it just wants to. And so when we're in certain play aspects, this thinking is removed. And so we can kind of just be who we are and move like we're supposed to. And so what happens, like with certain time constraints, it limits how we move and we try to choose the path of least resistance. So we end up finding ourselves in these games performing better and moving better than we would have if somebody's instructing us.
Part of what you're talking, right, is just like I think one of the things they talked about a lot in here is like really good athletes versus like just okay athletes too, and how just those okay athletes sometimes aren't given the chances that the really good athletes are. So essentially they're restricting themselves and they're putting pressure on themselves, even in a game situation. They may be thinking more analytically, more mechanically, so they make sure they don't screw up so that this isn't the last chance they have, which really just like in turn hurts them because they don't have this creativity and this ability to just have movement flow and try new things, and they have the ability to fail with it being okay. Right. So it restricts them even more. And that was something I thought was really interesting. I think you're kind of getting at there. That was, I think I probably experienced in my career a little bit too, was just like, I think everyone does, right? I think I talked about it with, Owen's not here today, but yesterday I talked about it with Owen, and the fact that like, I think his career as a college baseball player was very close to being very successful. And all of a sudden it just wasn't. And it just plummeted him down this hill of like, thinking too hard, over analyzing everything, and it just became too much for him. And then he actually he could talk about this more too, but like then he actually hit like a rock bottom position of like, I don't care anymore. I'm just going to go out here and just like do things, and I'm just going to try and throw hard. I'm going to have success here, and he did, and he got better, right? Because it was like can't get any worse, right? But if you can, like, I think something we can talk about today is how do we instill that in younger athletes to make sure that like they don't lose their creativity because they're worried that if something goes wrong once, their coach is going to bench them and they're not going to be able to do things. They have to follow everything to a T. And then on my aspect of it, right, is like, I don't think I had very much fun playing baseball. I had fun winning and having success and stuff, but like, it wasn't actually fun unless I won and beat other people. Right. So I wish I could have, as a younger age, understood that freedom aspect of like not having to do everything perfectly to make sure everything goes right, but also just like being okay with failure, being okay with trying new things, being okay with just literally having fun playing the sport instead of just deeming everything as a success or a failure.
Yeah, I think I have some similar experiences from my own career, kind of to Owen, where when I was in college, especially towards the end, I felt like I was on top of the world, and then stepped into minor league baseball and pretty quickly realized that my throwing speeds were not kind of where they needed to be. And I immediately just started obsessing over trying to change what I was doing in game, which, as we know, and they talk a lot about in the episode, like that probably governed me from actually being able to throw harder. And then to double on top of that, like I was like, well, if I don't have a successful start, like this could be the last game I pitch. So I'm battling, like trying to control my body to throw harder. And I really don't know what I'm doing in that aspect, but I'm governing myself. And then I'm also like really focused on the results. And for what it's worth, baseball became very unfun. And I was out of baseball 2 years later, wanted nothing to do with training or throwing, anything related to that. And then a couple years after that, I kind of came up with the idea that like throwing differently might be the solution, and started to feel good. And now I love throwing. And now I love the idea of like stepping in to throw live with guys, or just throwing a bullpen. And so much of that comes from like the allowing myself to fail while I try to figure out how to move the right way. And I think that came to my career at the end, right? Which is I was fortunate enough to like have a long enough career to experience that on the back end. But that's the same experience that a lot of these athletes might face in high school, early college. And so like understanding that failure is okay as long as you can learn from it and use it as a tool. And I think that's a lot of what they talk about, is that like everything's not technical. Everything's not just the masculine approach. There's so much of this underlying like rhythm, tempo, feel, freedom stuff that all kind of plays into it. And I'll talk later about another kind of aspect that came into my mind during the episode, but I really just wanted to share that, because if you do press yourself too hard technically, the sport can just become unfun. And like the whole goal is to provide you with some freedom from your regular life and allow you to work at something that you're passionate about and that you enjoy. So just making sure that those things are part of training and they're part of competition is so important.
They talk about how like, fun isn't something that can be measured and things like that. And I think that's perfectly fine, and understanding that even whether it's in the sport or in the weight room, like you don't have to have everything be measured to make sure that it can improve a month later, 6 months later, a year down the road. So I think understanding that is so incredibly crucial as well, that like we can go out there and we can just like do something because we enjoy it, right? Take the constraints off, have freedom to fail, have freedom to do new things. I think we can talk about a bunch of different examples, but just kind of like as you talked about right there, just kind of something that just like popped into my head. And Cole, if you want to talk about it more too, you can certainly like continue to lead the conversation down the podcast if you want to. But I was just going to kind of briefly talk about like when Joel was talking about him as a basketball player in practice and stuff like that. I don't know if you want to lead in with that at all.
Joel was playing high school basketball. Like you said, he was a good player, nothing kind of too special, but overall, he was describing he was playing a big team. They had one of the best players in the state on the other team. And Joel's coach came up to him and just said, Joel, whenever you get the ball, shoot. And so this gave him the freedom of mind to kind of pull the trigger whenever he wanted to. And, once he got the ball, he was kind of destined to shoot. So kind of remove the thinking aspect of kind of playing the game from him. And so what this did is Joel was playing this game and he wasn't thinking. All he was thinking was, all right, get the ball and shoot. And he was scoring as many points as he could. And the game kind of went really well. And he was cashing checks, shooting threes. And things went well. But overall, it's kind of getting at the point that, once you're kind of confident in yourself and you're not thinking about every sort of small action you make, kind of success usually rolls your way.
Yeah, I think it was cool because he essentially was like, he got to take on the persona of someone else. He was not himself during that, right? It was not if I miss a shot, it wasn't Joel failed and missed a shot. It was I'm the all-state player on the other team that makes all the shots and shoots all the shots, and I just chuck things up and like everyone's okay with it because I'm that good. And he didn't have the thought process that Joel is failing. It was just like, this is my role. I'm like an actor right now, and I'm just chucking shots up. And he had so much freedom to be able to probably just absolutely jack up wild position shots and still make them, right? And then that instills confidence in him. So it was just really cool to kind of see that in the fact that that's actually a pretty big thing too. So I know Deb's mentioned this a little bit to me and to some of the people she's talked to about like essentially like Kobe did it, right? With the Mamba mentality through there, right? Where he had literally like a persona that when he would go into games, he would become that. It was not Kobe anymore, right? So if you can find what your alter ego is, it can prove to be really cool in the fact that like you're not you anymore. You're this person. You can go out there and be a different person and kind of change things through there. So it's cool to have that kind of balance through there. And I thought it was really interesting.
So to go off that thought kind of you know, when he was able to play on the scout team and go and shoot all these random shots, get into this flow state, what it kind of made me think of is, you know, athletes who will come into the cage and face the machine, and they leave kind of with a little bit of like a sour taste in their mouth, or like it might not have gone exactly the way they wanted to. But, you know, what it made me think of is, if I can do a better job of giving them the freedom to be able to, you know, if you swing and miss, like it's fine. It's a training environment. It's not a competition. You should be able to try different things and try to find different solutions to be able to do those different things, to be able to continue to grow your athletic experience, I would say. And another big thing I took from the podcast too was when they were talking about, you know, giving the athlete just enough where they can figure out the rest too. I think that's huge. I think that's awesome. It was an awesome point. Kind of just fill up the cup about halfway, and then let the athlete, you know, try to figure out the rest, because ultimately that's what we want to try to do. We want to help them to be able to drive their own athletic career.
Yeah, I think there was it started to make me think of what could we do for like a baseball sense, and instantly what popped in my mind is myself, who was like a pretty good hitter in high school, but like very much like if you threw me outside pitches, I would just take them all day long. And it was more subconscious. It wasn't like I can't hit this pitch ball. It just didn't look good to me, right? So I was like, well, what if we could just have a guy get in the cage and like you're Vladimir Guerrero and you can hit everything and you can swing at everything. It shows them the ability that like you can barrel a ball 6 inches off the plate. You can barrel a ball that almost bounces, right? It just shows them their bandwidth of what they're able to comprehend and possibly deal with. And you can even just like I talked about with John Federico yesterday, it was just like, well, what's a game like situation we do? Well, like without telling the pitcher, we can be like, all right, as the hitter, you have 5 pitches to get hit or you're out, which doesn't mean like, it means you got to open up the zone a little bit, right? Anything close, you got to hit, because like you could get 4 pitches in, the guy could bounce one 3 feet in front of the plate. You don't want to get to that situation. So like put a ball in play, teaches some barrel control through there. Something that popped in my head as we were talking here, but like, pitching's a little harder. It's a little more constraint led with what we're talking about there. But I was just thinking like, well, maybe we just throw the plate away and we get on track, man. We just try to throw the nastiest pitches possible, because sometimes the nastiest pitches kids throw are very bad executed pitches. They're like way outside the zone. But you did what you were supposed to do. You got the 0 and the 22, but it was just like in the dirt, or it was like 4 feet above the guy's head. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. There's no strike zone anymore. So like you have just this one goal of like creative freedom of like, I'm not even gonna like Andrew said, like you're trying to make the ball go that way. Don't even tell them how to grip it. Just like find 7 different ways to do it, right? So I kind of go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say going off of Andrew's point. So my mind was kind of on what we were talking about with some of like the quote unquote fun aspect of it, but going back into kind of only filling their cup up halfway with what you're giving them. I think that's something that is, it's real. You really get a good understanding of like where people are coming from that come in and train. Because especially like on the throwing side, it's like we just started to have guys like ramp up, right? And there's a few kids that I hadn't really seen throw before. And it's like day 1, day 2 of them kind of ramping back up. And it immediately goes into, oh, can you take a video on my phone and can you show me how I'm looking? Like, how does my arm path look? Like all of this stuff rather than just feeling. And it's because it's been so instilled in them and they've been given so many verbal cues where they're just being fed like an insane amount of information. And they don't even know what feels good anymore. Like if a video looks good or if someone else tells them that something looks good, then that's how they then identify. So I think that's another part is like trying to like break them down to a point where you're letting them have more creativity. And I think that we've seen this, Cole wasn't there, but it was back in the summertime and we had some live ABs going. And one of the kids that's pretty good was thrown on the mound. And it was kind of just a situation where whoever wanted to hit could just go and hit. Like, it was just whoever was at the facility, if they wanted to go take some hacks off of them, they could do that. And it was really interesting because the kids that you have an understanding of like, okay, they actually perform at a pretty high level, like in games, those were the kids that wanted to jump in because they've been afforded so many opportunities. But the kids who were like, maybe didn't get a lot of playing time, or maybe they haven't been talked to by some schools, those kids didn't really want to hit because they were scared to fail, even though there's really no consequence. But if you put them in a spike ball game, or you let them run some routes when we're playing football, they don't care at all because there's no output necessarily associated with that. Like, it's not their actual sport, so they don't care. So that's one of the things I really like is so many of these kids only play baseball, and it's like, all right, go play spike ball for a little bit and try to beat somebody up, in October, November, because normally you're only competing in the springtime. Like, you need to do some other things and try to have some fun and something else and see if you can match that over, and to see if you can have that idea of like, I don't really care, I just want to get the job done. If that can translate over and you're not just constantly asking for, how does my arm look? How does this look? How does that look? Like, was my fastball, like, was it this hard? Like, where they start getting mad and they're like basically nickel and diming themselves over like, a tenth of a mile an hour on their fastball.
Yeah, I think that's interesting how it just compounds, right? If you're a guy who has confidence and success, it just keeps getting more and more and more. Even if there's failure, it just keeps going more and more and more. And then the guys who aren't confident don't even try, and they just get worse and worse and worse because they're not even willing to try and fail. And it's like, how do you take it from, like, if there's a kid who doesn't want to hop in the cage during like high velo stuff because he knows he can't hit high velo, right? But then you go play spike ball and he's like the most confident kid in the world because he doesn't care if he wins or loses spike ball. Like, how do you now transfer that over to, like, it doesn't matter if you hit the ball or if you don't hit the ball right now, you have to try doing this, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I won't go off that anymore. Cole, go ahead.
Yeah, so kind of going back to like the only filling up the cup halfway, and Pat was talking about the constraints and kids almost thinking too much about the constraints. And so what I'm thinking on that is like, so as coaches, we're prescribing these constraints in these drills. And once like the athletes get so far in their head about trying to like be their own coaches and like kind of fix everything themselves, that's when the problems really start to occur. Because they're trying to like Pat was saying, like, they don't know if it feels good unless somebody tells them it like looks good. And so you're losing this connection between your mind and your body by allowing other people to really like tell you, like, if you're going good. The technology, if it tells you it's going good, like the TrackMan, oh, that didn't move that much, so it must have not been good. Like, you're losing the connection. So what's happening with this is like obviously the dissociation, and then it kind of goes down the path of the athlete just doesn't know themselves at all. Like, it spreads system wide, not only from their sport, but into their lifestyle, into school, into who they are. So this kind of not trusting your body, not trusting your mind, and not trusting what you feel is a system-wide loss just from trying to do too much at one time.
Yeah, I think that's part, you make so many great points there, but I think that's part of why it would be great to be with all these kids and be their coaches year round and stuff like that. But the fact that we don't get to makes it required that they have to learn as many things as possible and be responsible for their own development with our guidance. That, like, we can't tell them everything to do because all of a sudden they're going to be at the field and we're not there to tell them how to warm up or how to properly throw or how to make sure to make an adjustment in a game, right? So it feeds into that so well.
Yeah, and I think, Cole, you guys have all brought up great points so far, and like the fill the cup half full thing, I think that's like a perfect little line, right? Where it's like, from the throwing aspect, it's like, okay, kid comes in, they need a basic understanding of like how to set up the drill and how to execute the drill in a decent fashion. And then that's usually what I'll do. And then from there, it's just me asking them, how did that feel? And I ask that to kids. I probably ask that question 50 times a day, and they could probably get sick of hearing it, but I want to hear what they feel. And like, if they say good, I'm like, okay, well, we need to dive into that more, right? Because it can't just be how'd that look and I say good and they keep going, Because like you guys just said, if they can't associate with that, or they don't have an understanding of what that actually feels like, well, like Logan just said, when they're on their own, good luck. And I think that's probably like the correlation, or another sport and another activity that I participate in is skiing. And so growing up, right, if any of you guys have skied, or if you have tried to teach someone to ski, like you can't dive into the technical details of how to ski and get someone off the chairlift at the top of the mountain and wish them luck. They're going to ski into the woods, or they're going to cross themselves up and really hurt themselves. They need a basic understanding of kind of how to get going, and then they need a lot of freedom, right? Because it's a lot of like trusting in yourself that like, okay, this is scary. I don't know if I can turn. I just turned. Oh, wow. Now I know what that feels like. How can I repeat that feel? And I think like, as you look at the more technical aspects of skiing, like when you go skiing, you don't get out of the parking lot, get on the chairlift, go straight up to the top and just ski the hardest trail through the woods down. You could do that, but like in reality, you should probably have a little bit of some creative flow, some freedom, ski down some easier trails, make sure your body's feeling good, make sure your turns are good. Like it's a sport where you can seriously injure yourself. So you want to make sure that your body's capable and your mind and body are connected when you do go to do something challenging. And I try to think about skiing a lot when I think about like player development, because if you're a ski coach, right, you're going to talk to that athlete not while they're competing, right? They're getting in the gate and it's all bets off, and it's them versus the course. It's not them versus someone else. And that's where they have to be really in tune with their body, and they need to be able to make micro adjustments as they go. And this pulls me into the topic from the podcast that I loved, which is millimeters can make massive, massive changes. And if an athlete thinks that they need to have a technical swing every time, or they need to have technical mechanics throwing the ball every time, you're removing that freedom to find millimeter differences, which we learn and see every day can create massive adjustments, right? So like a millimeter adjustment in a swing could unlock 10 miles an hour of exit velo because the athlete makes contact in a different location. Millimeters of adjustment on a pitch grip or a pitch release could create 10, 15 inches of pitch movement, and all else stays the same. So like making sure there's afforded time and afforded reps for these athletes to have that freedom and not feel like, how was that? Was that one good? Was it bad? Was I in the right spot? It's like, who cares if you were in the right spot? Like Logan just said, remove home plate. Did the ball go left? Like, who cares if it went 30 feet or 100 feet or wherever it went? Like, did you make it go left? Because if you made it go left, we know you can make it go left. And now you know you can make it go left. And now it's just finding that repetitive feel and not worrying about executing it. Worry about executing it once you kind of have a grasp of that skill and a connection with your body and mind to repeat that skill.
I think going off that quickly too, because you're talking about like the creative freedom to make changes through there, but I think also understanding that like every hitting is a little bit different in that like it's reactionary. You're going to the ball. Pitching, you're trying to be precise and the same all the time, but you're never going to be the same. Every throw you make is probably going to be slightly different. So like variability through training and understanding that like everything's going to be different. You're going to have to make subconscious adjustments to make sure you can still execute a pitch. I talked with it. I think it was Colton yesterday, and maybe it's John Federico again, right? And it was just like, there's been times where like we go back to throw like a pitch through here and the ball moves in your hand. Like there's been times where my thumb has slipped off the ball. Still got to try and throw a strike, right? So like, then you don't think about that. It's just like, but like if your training is this concrete, try to be perfect every single time, then you're going to be really, really bad when you face something that doesn't involve absolute perfection, which could literally just be the weather or the umpire or the mound and a bunch of things you can't control, right? I mean, God, you land in like any mound other than a professional mound, you're going to land in a slightly different spot with your foot in a slightly different position. And if you have to be perfect every time, you're going to be awful, right? So going off like creative freedom as well as like forced variability through there, right? Where it's maybe it's landing on a different weird surface, maybe it's sort of throwing on a different sloped angle and stuff like just changing things is going to be
like
so
that
important.
in the rain, like you're practicing training, best time to get that, right? Like you're going to get variable feel. Throw a ball that's wet, get your hand wet. Like so many kids are from the Northeast where we have a relatively dry climate all winter. They're throwing inside in this very like dry setting. The ball has plenty of grip. They go outside in July, it's humid. They go to Florida, it's humid. They go to Georgia, it's humid. Oh, I can't grip my breaking ball. It's like, well, other guys can, so you got to figure out a way to do that. And that might be manipulating how your hand is in practice, right? A lot of kids, we have rosin at all the facilities. And like the reason being is that rosin is going to be on the mound in competitive tournaments. When it's humid, you want to be comfortable using that. You don't want to be like, I'm afraid to use this, right? Like if your hand is slipping in a game, you shouldn't be afraid of using something that's going to make that easier for you. So also like getting younger kids to feeling what rosin feels like, and it creates a little bit of tack in their hand. That tack might be the proprioception they need to make a slider break. And so they don't need to know that all these variabilities are like driving their development. They just need to be open to them. And that's like the art of coaching, and the job of a coach is that like, hey, I really need you to be open-minded to this today. It's going to make you better. You don't necessarily need to know why, but as they start to understand why on their own, they're going to be completely bought in to what you're providing them.
I think kind of going off of that with the whole idea of the millimeters making waves, I think it kind of goes back into the like throwing is it happens in such a quick window, and like Logan was saying, it's one of those things where at an amateur level, very very seldom are you going to have conditions that are going to be quote unquote like equal. So that variability is pretty important, and everyone talks about having like a repeatable delivery and repeatable mechanics and things like that. And like, I'm not going to sit here and say that like that stuff, like the way you throw doesn't matter, because it does. Like there's general things that you're going to kind of want to be hitting or following when you throw, but you're not always going to be the same. And I think it's good to just kind of be like, okay, and to take that for what it is, and the fact that that's okay. But I think the way that a lot of coaching and player development kind of goes, and what a lot of people are able to like take in on social media, where you see like do this, or there's a lot of like guidance on social media where it's like that's just a very general thing and it might not fit you at all, but people want to like soak that in, and they're searching for answers, so they think that there's like one right way, and that kind of feeds back into the whole like, oh, is my arm working okay because they saw a video on Instagram or something like that. And I think that's why it kind of comes back to it's like the coach's responsibility to like filling their cup up less, and being and identifying a drill or something that you feel is going to achieve the best possible outcome for them. That's really what it comes down to. They don't always need to like know why. If you think something's going to help them and you give it to them and you ask them how it felt, and you try to kind of stay away from just constantly telling them to feel certain things, I think that's probably going to lead to some better results. And it takes a really long time to undo something. Like if a coach that they had for a year told them to do something day in and day out, that's going to be in their head, and it's going to take a lot of reps for that to like escape them. I had read something, it was the guy's name, this is kind of getting away from the podcast a little bit, but it was Matt Nickel. He's like a big hockey strength guy up in Canada, and he had made a post about how he would rather have somebody come in to the weight room that has never lifted a weight before and try to teach them how to squat than somebody who learned how to squat and it was just complete trash. Because it's going to take that person, say 300 reps, like the newbie, 300 reps to like actually nail that and hit the right positions, where it's going to take like 3,000 reps to undo the absolute mess that you walked in on. And that's what happens so often. And that's why I think the on-ramp that a lot of these kids go through is very important, because that's where you come up with drills for them to do, and you talk a little bit less, and you let them feel things, and you let them explore. And like ideally those drills are going to help them, and they don't need to necessarily know why, they just feel it.
Yeah, I think that's so important to just be like quite vague with when you're asking questions and stuff like that, and make sure that it is led by the athlete. And then you can be, again, those guidelines to make sure the conversation is going in the right path, but like you're not necessarily telling them what to do. And it makes me think a little bit more, especially I don't know if it was Carson or Cole that was saying this, but like when you're talking about feel, right? And I think about it more for like the stuff of like the weight room. So like more of the stuff that Dan and Cole and I do. But like it's so easy to lead someone in a question of an exercise like, well, did you feel your glutes and your hamstrings on that one? And they'll just be like, yep. Where like if you ask that question instead of like, what did you feel there? What muscles did you feel? And then it'd be like, I felt this area right here. It's like, all right, well, that's your quads. And that's not necessary. And be like, okay. So like, but like, again, not leading in that way to be like, that's wrong. That's not what we want to feel. Be like, okay, well, let's try this and see if you feel something different. And again, being vague and just guiding them, but not telling them what they should be feeling, because they're just going to say yes. They might not know what they're even feeling. They might feel nothing, right? That's always fun. But it's so important to just not force feed your own thought process onto someone and really be able to have them, again, have that creativity.
So one other thing they talked about too that I really liked was time. It's ties right into what we're talking about now, but just saying the right thing at the right time, and that's the art of coaching. You can say less, and then find that moment where you can say the right thing at the right time. That's how you are going to take that athlete to find that aha moment and continue to advance.
Yeah, I think as coaches, there's a lot of like as Pat was saying with the we'd rather have some guy who's never even thought about doing something before than someone who's done this specific throw or lift or whatever poorly a ton of times. So it's important to be wary of over coaching and over cueing and bad coaching and all these things, and hard to dictate what's good coaching, what's bad coaching, but just like being aware of that is so important. That like we want to make sure that we're not doing harm to anyone.
To kind of go off on a side tangent, something we haven't talked about, another big topic that they discussed was kind of how the body holds on to emotions, and how dancing, shaking, and other kind of free and easy movements can help release them. So added tension in the body, tension can be good, tension can be bad. But usually if we're talking about smooth motions, trying to be quick and relaxed, sprinting, throwing, hitting, kind of all these things that are fast in nature, and they're not really so strong, even though there are aspects of strength in them. Kind of discussing how like some dancing, some kind of hopping and movement, and I like to even consider some impulses that kind of DAC Performance talks about as a similar rhythm thing to kind of shake these emotions out of the body. So if you're dancing, you're kind of freely moving to the music. Like Joel was saying, he went to that dance class. He had a great time. He didn't think anything about his dance moves. He kind of just went out. And then the next day he was dancing with his wife, and she was just noticing how much freer and easier he was. He was much smoother. And just because he wasn't thinking about it, and he got all these kind of emotions and past thoughts like out of his system. And kind of the same thing with impulses. So we have this rope, and you're pulling the slack out of it, and it gives you like an immediate snap back of force, a really rapid eccentric force. And kind of doing these with a rhythm or with like a certain tempo can kind of give you the same result of, I'm just here, say I'm doing a bicep impulse, I'm catching it here, I'm just feeling this muscle vibrate, shooting all the force through the tendons, kind of releasing that. And I think that's one way that we can definitely start implementing with athletes. That's going to give them like a direct response to their tendons, to their muscles, and kind of free them up. So, yeah.
I think part of what the impulse stuff does too is like, as you talk about rhythm, it gives one simple goal, and it's timing. And it's not necessarily to pull this a certain amount. It's not necessarily that you don't know how much effort you're putting into it. It's just like find the timing, find the rhythm, and it's a simple goal, right? But I think, yeah, I was excited after listening to that podcast to try, like they talked about the Qigong shake and stuff, and looking that up. And that was really interesting and cool because it does get you to very much relax. And I think it's an incredible warm up. If I could pick one warm up at this point, like it's a little bit of that. And I did like a variation with the guys the other day, and I think Andrew saw us doing it, and he was just like, what the hell is going on over there in this like circle of people just literally hopping around like this. But like it was absolutely incredible that like I just can't with this variation, we'll do it today. Yeah. But like I was just trying to go joint by joint, right? So the Qigong shake thing is a very whole body thing, right? But this was literally just like I was just trying to like move through my hand and just see if I could get my fingers to whip and be relaxed. And like that was shocking how challenging it was for a lot of people. But then we just went through and we just tried to have our wrists be very loose, right? And then we went through and it was like, let's work to the elbow joint and let's create like this whip action. It's almost like you're doing like the pronated throw down through here, but like understand it, like see how loose my fingers can get through there, right? And then it was the whole arm. And it was essentially creating this whip chain effect that would spiral down the arm, right? And then I started, you can't see it right now, but I started with my foot. And that was really hard. But like all of a sudden you get to this point, you're like, oh shit, my foot is really loose and my ankle's really loose right now. And then we started going to the knee joint and the hip. And then we started doing like full body shakes and stuff like that. And like literally we did this for like 2 minutes and my body was just buzzing. And I was like ready to do like a full workout at that point. And I didn't do anything else. We're definitely going to integrate that a little bit into this stuff, but it was very cool. And one of the interesting is like John again was doing this and he was like, wow, I'm way better at this on my right side than my left side. Right. So it was like, okay, this is understand that we have a tough time with disinhibition of the left side of your body right now. But once he kind of got into it, it took him a little bit extra time. Then he noticed, he was like, wow, my face feels way more relaxed. I normally have a lot of tension through my face. And I'm just like, people are just like this. Their eyebrows are up, their eyes are wide open, their face is just here instead of just being relaxed through that state. He was like, it was amazing. He was able to literally just like shake his face and have his mouth and stuff go places. It was just like, it was really cool for him to finally have that realization of like, this is what relaxed and smooth and whippy is like. And like, I'm going to Qigong shake on the first tee box and just hit bombs after that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we played golf last week on Friday. It was kind of chilly and I was at the range early before. And I hadn't listened to this podcast yet, but I was literally doing like move your joint moves, Cole, on the driving range. And people were looking at me like I was crazy, but it was chilly. I woke up, I was stiff, and I was like, if I just start trying to swing like a 7-iron right now, my back's just going to lock up in 18 holes. It's definitely not going to be possible. And so I did. I just moved my joints through like the ground up and then started swinging, and swinging felt so easy. And I felt like I had the best connection to my, like, it's a golf club utensil in your hand, whatever, but like I felt like I was actually connected to that rather than it being this foreign thing in my hand. And so it was more just move my body and the club's going to go with me and the ball flight's going to be what I want, which was really cool. And I think like it made me immediately realize that like, okay, guys should probably do this before they throw, especially like if they throw higher volume the day before, they're coming in for a recovery day, they're going to have some tension and some stiffness as a recovery like aspect from the day prior or maybe 2 days after, right? If you get more second day soreness, and it's like that could be a day where this is vastly important to like reset the system, right? We want to try to do 2 or high volume days a week. Well, it's like if the first one sets us up to be bound up and tight the rest of the week and we don't do anything to free ourselves back up, is that second higher volume or higher intensity day really going to be as beneficial as it could? And that's where I think like really making sure, same thing, like some kids are addicted to swinging. They want to swing 200 swings a day, and getting them to understand that like, okay, maybe I've seen pro guys do that and they can do that, but like it's going to require a lot more maintenance of your body to be able to do that. And that's something too, where the athlete starts to learn these things, because when they are away from us, whether it's a month, 2 months, or a full season, like pro guys are here and then February they're gone and we don't see them again until September, maybe October. We can't like see them physically doing things on a day-to-day basis, but hopefully what they've done in the off season allows them to maintain that through the season. And now we can pick up and keep going from where we left off last season. And I think that's like a perfect example of a handful of the pro guys that we've been working with is now they're home, they're back into doing things, and they've started to buy in a little bit more because they saw what they did last year carry with them during the season. And it's not that we taught them anything like mind-blowing or different. It's more just like them starting to buy in to this stuff and understand this stuff and understand how to dose it, understand what they need on a daily basis. Because so much of it is going to come down to that. And I think that's where you ask like a professional baseball player a vague question, you're going to get a very good understanding of how they think about their movements, how they think about how their movements should look. And like you said, Pat, like unworking some of these things might take 2 seasons, right? But if an athlete can start working on something, I think of like Caleb, right? Like Caleb's been working to free his body up to move faster for the last, let's say, 12 months. He only really did it for like 5 months of off-season training, but he was able to carry that faster speed and better body awareness with him all season. And now he's fully bought into doing that this season. And hopefully he ticks it up even more. And now he's looking at a chance to become potentially a major leaguer. And I think that's like the thing that kids need to hear a little bit too, is that like this stuff is something you have to be committed to. You don't have to be committed to training 3 hours a day every day. You just need to be committed to the long-term vision of why you're doing what you're doing. And like, what is the gray area that I don't know yet? Because that's where that's the low-hanging fruit, right? Like, if you're really good at a slider, but you can't manipulate the ball any other way, well, when you can't throw your slider that day, are you just going to not compete? Are you going to tell the coach you can't go in there and do your job? Like, no, you need to figure out a way to do those things. So it's really just making sure that you can help them uncover a lot of this unknown, but they should be the one uncovering it. And it should be their feels leading to that discovery, not your thoughts. And I think that's to like point the finger at myself, right? I just said earlier that I asked the question, how's that feel, all the time. I also asked the question, did that feel better? And that's a question I would like to start removing from my tool belt, because a lot of times athletes just go, yeah. And it's like, I should have let that be something they tell me, not like, if it looks better to me, great, but just keep that to myself. That can be something I tell them at the end of the session, right? And that way they have maybe that freedom for another 10 or so reps, and they tell me, hey, this feels way better. And now it's them coming to that conclusion. And that's like, I mean, that's where coaching comes into play.
All right, two things. Not to backtrack too much, but you're talking about the DAC joint moves and how they really made you free up. So Brady's been posting, Brady owns DAC, if you don't know. But Brady's been posting a lot of like the high speed joint moves and kind of showing how you can really focus on being as fast as you can doing them. You can focus on having rhythm doing them, and you can focus on being as fast as you can while being loose doing them. And so these going into the joint moves with different goals in mind is going to give you different results, is how I'd put it. So say you're going into this, I'm going to be as fast as I can, but I'm going to be loose. I'm not even going to be trying. So giving you this feel of saying an elbow move. So elbow is going to be here. I'm just trying to be quick like this before I'm throwing. Could give me the feel of when I'm pulling it to release. My elbow is really going to flow into that extension and kind of internal rotation of the shoulder. So yeah, having these goals with these kind of shaking movements can really free up the body and allow the athlete many more movement options than they would have had before. And then to go on another side tangent, you were talking about Caleb unlocking this kind of speed in the off season, and it was really something that he believed in, and it transferred to his season this past year in the spring and the summer for the Marlins. And so you didn't really get into a deep description of it, but why I think one of the reasons it like really provided him such results was that Caleb believed that this would help him. Caleb thought getting faster would make him a better baseball player. You didn't tell him that. I mean, you probably did, like this could help, but Caleb actually thought it would help. And when athletes are actually bought into what they're doing and they're not just trusting the process because someone told them to, they're going to get a different result because one, they care more about their training. So they're going to actually dive into it and give it everything they have. And two, like, since I'm bought in, like I'm having fun. Like I'm enjoying this. I'm seeing results with this. Like that is what we need. We need to stop telling people that this is what they need to do because we said so. Like you can do this, one, because it's going to get you better, and two, because you like doing it. Like if you're not having fun when you're training, you're doing something wrong.
Kind of what you were saying there. I think it's really interesting because they had made the point also about how there's so many people that are like, I'm done with this. Like once their career is over, they're like, I'm done. And that kind of goes back into the enjoyment aspect. And I think, and this kind of brings in the track aspect, because I know they're talking about track and swimming. So Dan will probably have some thoughts on this, I would imagine. But they were talking about how a lot of like swimmers are like swimming is a really, really hard sport. I don't know if you guys know a lot about that, but like the schedule that they keep, like I dated a girl in college for like 2 years that was on the swim team, and their practice schedule was crazy. I mean, it was like 2-a-days. They had their dry work where they were like, that's when they're like actually in the weight room, but then they're also crushing it in the pool. Like it can kind of tear you down, especially if you're like in that position where you're kind of like scared a little bit to take chances, like we were talking about earlier. But that comes up a lot. I mean, there's a lot of guys I played baseball with in college that, I mean, they probably haven't really picked up a baseball since senior day. You know what I mean? Or whatever our last game was. I guess it wasn't senior day, but you know what I mean. And I just think that's pretty interesting. I've heard different takes on it. Like some people would never want to go down to a level of baseball like that's like a men's league where maybe it's not taken seriously. Like some of my teammates said, like if they're going to play baseball, they want it to be with like in a very competitive environment. But at the same time, it's like that kind of like training aspect goes out the window. I mean, you look here, and I mean Carson throws harder now than he did when he was a professional baseball player. Like there's like an enjoyment level that kind of varies, and it's just very interesting on how somebody kind of gets to that point. Because I mean, you're probably pretty mad at baseball when your career was winding down, I would imagine. I mean, I know I was very frustrated. I had just had surgery and I felt like I missed out on some things, and I wished I could have had some things go a little bit differently. And I took a little bit of time away from baseball, and then I come back to it and really enjoy it. So it's interesting how that kind of works for people, and how someone decides they want to be completely done with it and never engage with it again versus someone who does.
Like what you guys both just said with Cole, like the whole trust the process thing. Like if you've gone through something like Pat, you just said, or like what I talked about, or what Owen's talked about, like trusting the process is the most eyewash slogan that can come with that. Like if someone told me to trust the process while I was in pro ball, I probably would have quit. Like that's where I was at, was just that like, and I pretty much was like teetering with that. And eventually when I got released, it was like, I just wanted to quit. I wanted to be done, because I realized that like the limiting factor for me was throwing velocity. And then when I asked for like guidance or help around, maybe how to figure out these solutions, it was just the trust the process, throw the ball far, try to throw it harder. And it was just like, I am trying to do all those things. And then so it almost feels like you have nothing else to try. And that's the last thing you want an athlete to feel, right? Especially before they're done high school. Like high school sports are a way, ideally, for anyone who wants to compete, has the ability to try to compete. And they should be, whether they only get 4 at-bats in a season or they're the starting shortstop, like if that person's playing that sport and dedicating that time and taking on that experience, like they should be allowed to fail and not like be yelled at by a coach or benched immediately. Like there are going to be athletes that maybe aren't the MVP of the team, but you don't know their role or the value they can add until you let them make some mistakes and see if they can correct on them. Because I think we could all probably circle back to that in our own playing careers. Is like my early college career, I felt like anytime I went to a game, I had to be perfect. Otherwise, I wasn't going to get a chance to pitch again. And it wasn't until I didn't give a shit about the outcome that I started to really, really enjoy being out there. And that's like circling back to the persona thing. Like myself, my mom, my dad, we would talk about this thing called Tiger Blood, which like you picture Tiger Woods, right? Like you ever see Tiger Woods play golf and not expect to be the best golf player in the world? Like anytime he's playing, it's I'm going to absolutely beat everyone, even if I'm down by 10 strokes, even if I'm up by 15 strokes. Like it's just this thought process of like, when I'm out there, I'm the king in the jungle and no one can come near me. And that's like, that's not Carson. That's not like who I am on a day-to-day basis in here. But like if anyone wanted to compete out there in the cage today, like I would find the ability to switch that over and enter that thought process of like, yeah, I might lose, I might fail, this might go poorly, but the thought process I'm going to have going into it is going to be undeniable. And that's something I can control. And that's something I can control with like the perception to others, right? Like you might have a shit day, but no one else needs to know. And that's something too, where like you start talking about a team sport aspect. You start talking about maybe track and field, right? If you're supposed to be the fastest person on the line and it's not your day, do you want everyone to know it's not your day? No, they're afraid because they think you're faster than them, right? They don't think they can catch you. So don't let them know any bit of your like slight lack of confidence. Keep that internal and control that, because so much of that is up to you. And that's something you can start to build in a training atmosphere too, where it's like, yeah, talking about playing spike ball. Well, if anyone wants to play spike ball against Logan and I, they're not going to win. And that's just the thought process going in, is that like, I'm so excited to compete right now that there's no chance that this other person has a chance to beat me. And those are all things that athletes can start to build away from their sport. And if you build that stuff away from your sport, it's just going to bleed into the rest of your life. And that's something that I think, Cole, you made a great point on earlier, where it's like, if an athlete starts to lose their connection to who they are in this training environment or the sport, it can bleed into the rest of their life, and vice versa. Like if they have control and belief in what they're doing in a training environment, well, then when they go home to do their homework, they're going to have belief in what they're doing, and they're going to want to do it well. They're going to want to be a good member of their family. It's just all kind of snowballs, but it's like something we can kind of control and instill is just this: it's okay to fail, and it's okay to have freedom, and it's okay to ask questions. I think those are three things that we stress all the time.
Yeah, makes sense. I think getting back to the podcast a little bit, but also adding on to that, something I made in my notes that just made me think of listening to the podcast and what you just said was, I think it's so important and okay to see things the wrong way too, because I think some of the best exercises I've come up with, some of the best thoughts I've come up with has been quickly looking at something and very much seeing the wrong thing, but it makes my brain think in a different way. And not telling a kid that like, no, that's not how it happened. That's not what it was. Like, well, that it literally, like, because we live in a constraint-led world, I think, right? So being able to see things improperly just gets you right outside of that, right? And it's like, oh shit, I didn't even think that was a possible thing. And then guess what? It wasn't a possible thing because it isn't. But now I'm thinking differently. So it's a really cool thing as well. And Cole, I don't know where you wanted to go with the podcast. We're getting pretty long into this thing, but something I thought was interesting and cool was when they talked about essentially being able to have kids come up with rules for games on their own, and where it's like, and I don't know if this was a specific example. I didn't quite know the example, like the touch the cheek thing they were talking about and stuff like that. But I thought of just like, and again, I talked with this with John and I think Andrew yesterday and Owen, but it was just like starting with a simple game of tag, and it's me versus Carson in a game of tag, right? And it's like, well, now the only constraint in here is that Carson and I each get to come up with 3 rules. We might come up with those rules at the start. It might be as soon as I tag Carson now just lost that one. Now he gets to make up a rule that is an advantage for him based off his athletic capabilities, blah, blah, blah. And the game builds, and we get to a point where we finally have a game with rules that we just made up on the spot that helps us out each, right? So it made me think, like, I'm going to start asking in assessments or just asking random kids. And I asked John this yesterday. What is, like, you play baseball, that's your main sport. What rule would you change, or how would you manipulate the game to make it easier for you? Which he said, as a primary hitter, he would add another strike. So he'd have a 4th strike, right? So then we dive into that deeper. Well, why? Why do you want to have an extra strike? Why didn't you want to just move the fence in so you could hit home runs easier? It's like, well, he wanted an extra strike because he feels like that would give him the ability to swing harder more often, like at full intent, which then tells me, okay, let's get with Andrew a little bit and talk about why does John think that he can't make quality contact swinging at 95%? Maybe that's something we can do, right? That he's good at swinging at 85% making contact, and I'll say good at 90%, 95%. We know it's not always going to be 100% to make good contact, but that in turn gets kids to think in a different way instead of just being like, what are some of your strengths and weaknesses, right? That's hard for a lot of kids, but like, how can you cheat at the game to make it easier for you? You probably thought about that before, right? If you could take a strike back or something like that, or make the strike zone bigger because your command stinks, or make the plate closer because you want to throw harder, right? It's just it's a outside the box thought process on how we can make the game easier, and then also just like, okay, how do we get that skill better for you in a legal way?
I really like that thought process. I mean, it's just like I immediately thought like, okay, if a kid throws hard but doesn't throw a ton of strikes, like why do you need a third baseman? Just put him behind home plate. Now you got two catchers. If the ball goes to the backstop, that guy's going to pick it up and he could throw it second or third or wherever. And now guys aren't taking extra bases. And like, that's a crazy outside the box thought. But like, if that allows the pitcher to feel confident and strike everyone out, well, guess who's going to win the game? Your team. And like, that's not something you do in a game per se, but like in practice, you could just like create that comfortable setting, see if it works. Same thing, like thinking about the hitting thing. I was like, I would just immediately make the left fielder not be allowed to play left field. And I would just try to hit it to left field because I know that that's a desirable thing and something I could probably consistently do. And it's like, okay, well now what if I'm just hitting in the game and I picture that there isn't a left fielder? And I picture that all that space is wide open. Because in reality, we know if you do hit the ball with desirable metrics, it's going to play well out there. That guy's probably not going to be able to make the catches unless it's right at him. And it's like an athlete might limit themselves to thinking they can't pull the ball because the guy's going to make a catch. It's like they might make a catch on any play. And so just kind of like distorting the thought process of the rules is like where you're talking about with like whether it's good or bad or whatever. It's just creating a broader way to look at solving problems. And I think that's like in the simplest term as a coach, it's just helping the athlete solve the problem without giving them the answer. And so what questions can we ask to then create the problems that will be best for them to solve? Because once they learn to solve it, it's the whole teach a man to fish, feed himself for a lifetime, right? Like you don't need to help them catch the fish. You just need them to know how to go do it. And that's also where it's like, I've played with dozens of major leaguers. Do a lot of them know what they're doing in space or what their body's technically doing? No. Most of them have a thought of what it's doing. And in reality, something else might be taking place. And I think that's also like a massive thing of like, you just really need to be able to be a very good problem solver as an athlete. And as a coach, you have to be really good at providing problems that are going to be similar to the problems they're going to face in sport so that they can be confident that when that problem pops up, I can attack it head on and I don't have to run the other direction.
I think it allows us to, as coaches, to help the athletes understand why we're doing things too. Because I am just going to kind of transition all my questions. You know, I ask a lot of kids like if they're, you know, how their speed is, how their power is, stuff like that. And they tell me that they have good speed, right? But it's like, well, is that like good top end speed or is it good like quickness and agility off the line, right? And they may not know why I'm asking that. They're not going to understand necessarily force velocity profiles and power output and things like that. And you need to move this bar at this speed and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, all right, I'm going to ask the question to a kid who needs to improve his 60-yard dash. Be like, all right, if you could like turn it into a 10-yard dash, would that be a better result for you? But not even lead it that way. Like, what would you do in a sprint to beat all the other people on your team? Oh, I would shorten the race. Oh, I would make the race longer. That then is like, okay, the reason I asked that is because you want to make the race longer. So you're good at top end speed. You clearly can't accelerate. We're going to work on that. Right. If it's in the weight room and it's like, okay, if we're trying to have the most power output possible, are you going to restrict the amount of weight that we can go up to with people and you can only lift to 200 pounds? Or are you going to be like, you can't lift under 200 pounds? Because again, that's going to tell us in your own words, what are the things you need to work on? And we'll help guide you through that. But it just makes it so much more tangible than being like, based on your force velocity profile here, we need to make sure we're using heavier or lighter weights. But like that's they don't want to hear that. They might. It's going to be a very small percentage that want to hear that. But if it can show direct translation on like how to make this easier for you and how to make you better at your sport, I think it's so much more relatable.
All right. So that was our conversation on the Elastic Essentials topic by Joel Smith, who has his own podcast, Just Fly. And then with Austin Jochum with the Jochum Strength Podcast. Hope you guys appreciate listening to what we had to say and kind of the ideas that they put forth for us. And we'll see you soon. Evo fam out.